Have you ever wondered why a man only begins to truly see a woman when she is gone? Not when she walks out the door with her luggage in hand, but when her essence has silently withdrawn from him long before her body ever does. It is in that invisible moment, the vanishing of her warmth, the quieting of her gaze, the absence of her emotional presence, that something primal stirs within him. He begins to notice the spaces she once filled, the way her voice softened the sharp edges of his days, the way her laughter broke the monotony of his existence. Yet by then, the music has already stopped, and he finds himself in a deafening silence he helped create. In the deep language of Jung, what a man sees when she's no longer there is not just the loss of a partner, it is the collapse of a projection. For months, perhaps years, he had not been loving the woman before him, but the image his unconscious mind had painted of her. She was, in his inner theatre, a reflection of his unhealed mother wound, his unacknowledged fears, his hidden longing for comfort, beauty and safety. He could not tell the difference between the real and the imagined, because few ever can. But when she withdraws, the projection dissolves, and he is confronted not with her absence, but with the absence within himself. This is why her silence unnerves him more than her words ever did. He can argue with her anger, dismiss her complaints, and deflect her disappointment, but he cannot fight the void she leaves behind. The void is a mirror, and it shows him the hollow architecture of his own emotional house. If you've ever been that woman, you know the transformation it takes to reach this point. It is not the product of petty games or calculated revenge. It is born from exhaustion, from finally seeing the futility of pouring love into hands that only know how to take. In the Stoic sense, this moment is the turning inward, the awakening of your own sovereignty. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." In the silence you grant him, you are no longer an event in his life to be managed or taken for granted. You have reclaimed yourself as an inner citadel. Your gaze no longer scans the horizon for his validation because you have seen the truth. Validation borrowed from another is as fleeting as mist at dawn. But for him, the shock is different. His unconscious has been feeding on the emotional supply she gave without charge. The soft attentions, the intuitive understanding, the gentle tending to his unspoken needs. Without her, he must face the barren landscape of his own neglected soul. It is not her physical absence that burns him, but the realization that his sense of being seen, understood, and softened has vanished. Jung would call this the confrontation with the shadow, the sudden awareness of all that was denied, rejected, or ignored within the self. Some men will resist this confrontation with all their might. They will blame her for being cold, for changing, for withholding love. But the wiser ones, the rare ones, will see the truth. They will recognize that what they miss most is not her body beside them, but the man they became in her light. And they will see, perhaps for the first time, how fragile their sense of worth was without her reflection to hold it together. For the woman, this stage is dangerous but liberating. Dangerous because the man may seek to pull her back into the role she once played, using guilt, nostalgia, or sudden affection to restore the equilibrium that served him. Liberating because if she resists, she crosses a threshold few dare to cross, the place where her love is no longer a currency to buy his attention. Here, she begins to understand what Jung meant when he spoke of individuation. The process of becoming whole within oneself. She sees that her worth does not increase or diminish with his gaze. She is no longer a mirror for his ego, but a mirror for her own soul. And so the man stands there, looking not at her, but at the ghost of the woman he once knew, and realizing too late that the ghost was more alive than the man who took her for granted. He begins to search for traces of her in other women, in old messages, in the scent left on forgotten clothing. But the more he searches, the clearer it becomes. He was never truly looking at her when she was there, and now he must face the paradox, that the only way to truly see her is in her absence. In this absence, she too sees something. She sees that her love had been a kind of unconscious charity, given freely to someone who did not know its value. And she sees that her silence is not a punishment, but a protection. a way of keeping her soul from being drained by those who cannot pour back into it. She begins to walk differently, think differently, breathe differently, not because she has become harder, but because she has remembered the softness she gave so freely is a sacred gift, and not everyone is worthy of holding it. For a man, the moment she is no longer there is a psychic rupture, the collapse of an invisible scaffolding that had been holding his self-image together. He does not at first understand the depth of what has happened. He may think it is simply loneliness, a hunger for companionship, or the loss of a familiar face in his daily life. But beneath those surface sensations lies something far more unsettling, the shattering of a reflection he relied upon without knowing it. When she was present, her gaze acted like a mirror, not just any mirror, but one that softened the shadows, made the rough edges appear less jagged, and offered him the illusion of completion. Jung would say she was carrying part of his anima, the feminine aspect of his psyche that he had never integrated. Her kindness, her patience, her intuitive understanding were not just traits he appreciated. They were psychological nutrients his own soul was starving for. In her absence, those nutrients vanish, and he begins to feel the cold draft of his own unhealed wounds. For her, the departure was not sudden. It began in quiet moments, when she stopped explaining herself, when she no longer tried to make him understand, when the little joys of giving were replaced by the heavy fatigue of being unseen. That was when her soul began its retreat, even if her body still shared the same space with him. What he calls her leaving is, in truth, her returning to herself. It is here that a man often confronts a truth he had been avoiding. Love is not a possession, but a presence. You cannot keep it by holding tighter, by insisting, by demanding. Once her presence has withdrawn, all that remains are the echoes. He might send messages now, asking if she's okay, offering compliments he never gave before, trying to resurrect the warmth that once flowed so effortlessly. But she knows something he doesn't. The kind of knowing that comes from standing at the edge of your own emotional depletion and realizing you will not cross it again. In the Stoic sense, she has reached apatheia, not apathy, but a serene freedom from the pull of another's storms. Epictetus spoke of controlling what is within our power and accepting what is not. She has learned painfully that she cannot control whether he values her. She can only control the value she places upon herself. And so she shifts the axis of her world from his approval to her own integrity. This is the moment that disorients him the most, not her physical absence, but her emotional inaccessibility. The channels he once used to reach her, guilt, charm, promises, no longer open the door. They clang against the lock of her new boundaries. And boundaries, to a man who has benefited from her selflessness, feel like rejection. But boundaries are not rejection. They are architecture. They are the framework in which her soul can breathe without collapsing under the weight of another's needs. Jung might say she is individuating, no longer living in the persona that played the nurturing role, but reclaiming the wild, unfiltered self she was before the role was assigned. From the outside, it might seem like she has grown colder, but coldness is not the right word. Clarity is. She sees now that not every hand that reaches for her deserves to be held. She understands that a man who only sees her value when she is gone is not yet a man who can hold it when she is present. And she no longer wishes to be the mirror that reflects someone else's worth at the cost of erasing her own. For the man, this clarity she carries feels like a wall. He wonders why he cannot get back in. He may remember her laughter, the way she believed in him, the countless small gestures she made to make his life softer. What he does not yet realize is that those were not obligations she owed, but gifts she chose to give. And gifts, once misused, are not replaced by demand. This is the psychology of absence. It exposes what presence concealed. Her leaving is not a simple subtraction. It is a revelation. It shows him the imbalance he refused to see, the ways he relied on her emotional labor without gratitude. And if he is wise, truly wise, he will use this emptiness not as a wound to lick, but as a mirror to study. He will begin the work of integrating his own shadow, learning to provide him, self the emotional grounding he once took from her. And for her, she walks into this next chapter without the heaviness she once carried. She begins to experience her own company as enough. Her laughter now belongs first to herself, her tenderness given where it can be met, her energy guarded like a rare jewel. This is not selfishness. It is the highest form of self-respect. The woman who was once the mirror for a man's unacknowledged needs has turned that mirror inward, and in it she sees herself, whole, luminous, untouchable. The absence of a woman who once anchored a man's inner world forces him into a confrontation with time itself. Days that once passed unnoticed now stretch, heavy and slow, because they are no longer softened by her presence. Meals taste blander, victories feel hollow, even moments of pleasure carry a faint echo of something missing. He begins to realize that her role in his life was not merely decorative. She was the hidden structure holding together his emotional architecture. Without her, the foundation shows cracks he never noticed. In Jungian terms, the anima he projected onto her has withdrawn, leaving him face to face with his unintegrated inner feminine. For many men, this is a deeply unsettling state. Without her emotional attunement, he is left to navigate his feelings without a compass, and here lies the truth he may resist. The compass was never hers to provide, it was his to build. Yet as long as she was present, he never saw the urgency. Only in her absence does the hunger for self-knowledge arise, though for some it arrives too late to repair what was lost. She, meanwhile, is discovering the subtle intoxication of emotional autonomy. At first, the silence feels unfamiliar. Her days used to be filled with the constant hum of tending to another's moods, translating his unspoken needs, cushioning his falls. Now that energy flows inward. She begins to notice how much more she sleeps, how her breath feels deeper, how her mind is no longer burdened by the tension of walking on eggshells. The detachment that once felt dangerous now feels like oxygen. This shift is not always visible to the outside world. To others, she might look the same voice, same smile, same grace. But the undercurrent has changed. Where once her love was given reflexively, it is now given deliberately, and only where it is returned with the same reverence. She is no longer afraid of being alone because she has felt the deeper loneliness of being unseen in someone else's presence. That she will never choose again. For the man, the absence becomes a mirror of his own avoidance. The dinners he eats alone, the messages he drafts but does not send, the moments he scrolls through old photos, all of it is the psyche's way of trying to reclaim what was abandoned. And yet, the more he tries to grasp at her memory, the more he feels her slipping further away because he is not grasping at her. He is grasping at the version of himself that existed when her light was near. This is where the human mind often falls into the trap of idealization. He begins to remember her not as she truly was, but as the best version of his memories allow. He forgets the moments he ignored her needs, the countless warnings in her eyes. Jung might call this the golden shadow, seeing only the positive traits he once took for granted, as if polishing her memory could bring her back. But the truth is sharper. What he longs for is not just her, but the wholeness she made him feel, a wholeness he now must create on his own. She does not watch his struggle with cruelty or satisfaction. There is no scoreboard in her heart. She simply knows that her path now bends away from being the keeper of someone else's emotional survival. She has learned that love, when it costs you yourself, is too expensive. The absence has not made her heart harder, but wiser, like water flowing around stones instead of breaking itself against them. And for both, the absence reveals a final truth. Presence is a choice, not a given. She once chose to be there, to offer her time, her laughter, her patience. Now she chooses differently. And in that choice, there is a lesson many never learn. That the truest love is not about possession, but about the freedom to walk away when your soul is no longer nourished. For the man, this may become the quiet beginning of his own individuation. If he is willing, he will face the discomfort, learn to hold his emotions without outsourcing them, and discover that his worth is not dependent on being reflected in her eyes. If he is unwilling, he will repeat the cycle with another, searching endlessly for a woman who can replace what he lost, never realizing that what he seeks is not in her, but in himself. For the woman, this chapter is the reclamation of her inner throne. She no longer walks into a room wondering who will see her. She walks in already knowing who she is. And that knowing, that unshakable rootedness, becomes the quiet power she carries. She is no longer the echo of someone else's needs. She is the voice of her own. The longer she remains absent, the more he begins to understand that what he misses is not simply her, but the stability of the emotional world she built around him. Without her, the days have edges, sharp, cold, and unsoftened. Conversations lack the warmth of her intuition, and victories feel strangely incomplete. In the stillness, he starts to notice the fragility of his own inner scaffolding. She had been, unknowingly, the silent architect holding together the spaces between his doubts and his ambitions. Jung would say this is the unmasking of projection. While she was there, he lived within the illusion that she was the answer to his restlessness, the soothing force for his unspoken fears. But in reality, she had been carrying what he had not yet learned to hold within himself. When she leaves, truly leaves, the projection shatters, and he is left with the raw materials of his own unfinished self. It is a confrontation few men are prepared for, because it demands not the pursuit of another woman, but the pursuit of the parts of himself he abandoned long ago. For her, this absence feels less like a departure and more like a homecoming. In the early days, she may still feel the echo of him, the way a room holds the scent of a candle long after the flame is gone. But as the days turn into weeks, she realizes how much lighter she feels. Her mind no longer rehearses conversations in advance. Her body is no longer tense with the need to anticipate his moods. The peace she feels now is not the fragile quiet of avoidance, but the deep stillness that comes from no longer having to explain her worth to someone unwilling to see it. She begins to inhabit her own space differently. Where her energy once flowed outward, endlessly trying to fill the gaps in his emotional world, it now circles back to her. She reads more, sleeps deeply, speaks slower. She rediscovers old hobbies, or simply allows herself the rare luxury of doing nothing without guilt. This reclamation is not about replacing him, it is about replacing the version of herself who believed she had to overextend to be loved. Meanwhile, he may find himself oscillating between anger and longing. Anger because he feels she has changed or given up. Longing because he can't deny the way her presence elevated his life. These emotions are not contradictions. They are the two sides of the same truth. He is mourning the loss of a woman he never fully saw. And this mourning is not just about her. It is about facing the emptiness her absence has revealed in him. In Stoic philosophy, Seneca speaks of loss as an inevitable teacher. He suffers more than necessary who suffers before it is necessary. The man in this space suffers both before and after necessity, replaying what he could have done differently, imagining conversations that will never happen. Yet the lesson remains, absence is not simply the removal of a person, but the unveiling of what you failed to value when you had it. For her, the journey becomes a quiet refining of boundaries. She is no longer willing to make herself small for the comfort of another. This is not bitterness, it is discernment. She knows that to love without self-respect is to trade pieces of herself she can never get back. And so, her love becomes rarer, not because she has less of it, but because she has learned to guard it like a precious inheritance. For him, the haunting realization emerges that her love was never something he could demand. It was always something she chose to give. And now that choice has been withdrawn, he must reckon with the truth that love cannot be secured by entitlement, only by presence, effort, and reverence. If he is wise, this absence will become the crucible in which he begins to transform. He will learn to integrate the anima within, to find his own emotional grounding, and to approach future love not as something to consume but as something to co-create. But if he is not, he will wander from one reflection to another, hoping to see himself in a woman's eyes, never realizing that the image he seeks will only appear when he learns to see himself without her. She, on the other hand, walks forward lighter, sharper, and quieter in her certainty. She has learned that her presence is not an obligation, but a privilege, one she will never again give to someone who only sees its worth when it's gone. There comes a point when the absence stops being an echo and becomes a new reality. For him, it is a reality he resists, because it forces him to admit that she was never as replaceable as he once believed. At first, he may try to fill the void with noise, new conversations, fleeting distractions, perhaps even another woman. But each attempt collapses under the weight of comparison, because what he is searching for is not her exact form, but the equilibrium her presence brought to his soul. And that cannot be duplicated by simply placing another body in her place. Jung would call this the collapse of the unconscious contract, the unspoken agreement that she would tend to his unacknowledged wounds while he remained unaware of hers, has been broken. Without her tending, the wounds surface, and they demand attention. He begins to feel the rawness of his own insecurities, the cracks in his self-worth, the vulnerability he once masked with her validation. And it is here, in this unshielded state, that the man faces his most defining choice: to seek another savior or to become his own. For her, the transformation deepens. The further she walks from him, the more she remembers who she was before the weight of his needs pressed into her every day. She recalls the woman who laughed for no reason, who made choices without second-guessing, who could rest without feeling guilty. It is not that she becomes a different person after leaving, it is that she returns to the person she was before she began shrinking to fit into his comfort. The power in this return is subtle but profound. She no longer measures her worth by how much she is needed. She no longer confuses being indispensable with being loved. The Stoics would call this living in accordance with nature, to be as you are, without distortion, without bending yourself into unnatural shapes to hold the affection of another. She has discovered that true connection cannot exist without mutual responsibility, and that to carry the entire emotional weight of a relationship is to walk with chains that were never hers to bear. For him, the absence grows heavier over time, not lighter, because absence is not static, it evolves. In the beginning, it feels like a temporary discomfort. Later, it becomes an awareness that creeps into quiet moments, whispering reminders of what he ignored. He begins to notice other men appreciating the qualities in women that he once took for granted in her, the attentiveness, the warmth, the patience. And each recognition is a small cut, reminding him that what he once had was not common at all. The human mind clings to the idea of return. He may tell himself she might come back, that time will soften her stance, but absence has a way of turning hope into delusion when the reality is acknowledged. Because in truth, the woman he knew no longer exists in the same form. She has evolved in his absence, and that evolution has closed the door that once stood open for him. She does not hate him, nor does she spend her nights replaying his mistakes. Indifference has replaced longing, and that is something far more final than anger. Anger still cares. Anger still holds a thread between two people, but indifference severs it completely, leaving no path for the same connection to be rebuilt. This is the part that breaks him, the realization that he could weather her rage, but he cannot survive her disinterest. Jung reminds us that every ending is a call to individuation. For the man, her absence can be the fire that burns away the illusions, if he lets it. It can strip him down to the truth that no woman can complete him until he has completed himself. It can push him toward confronting the parts of himself he hid in her shadow. But this requires courage, and courage is rarer than longing. For her, the journey is no longer about him at all. Her path bends toward creation, building a life that feels like hers in every detail. The silence that once felt like an empty space is now filled with her own voice, her own decisions, her own laughter. She has learned that love given from fullness is a gift, but love given from emptiness is a slow death. And so the absence remains, not as a wound, but as a monument. For him, it marks the place where he lost her. For her, it marks the place where she found herself. Over time, the absence becomes its own kind of presence, a silent figure that sits beside him in the quiet hours, reminding him of everything he failed to notice when she was there. At first, he thinks this haunting is about her, but as the months pass, he begins to realize it is about him. It is about the way he moved through life, believing affection could be left unwatered and still bloom. It is about the way he let her shoulder the weight of their bond while he basked in its shelter. It is about the way he thought her patience was finite, not realizing that even oceans have shores. Jung spoke of the shadow as the parts of ourselves we cannot face without another to hold the mirror. In her absence, that mirror remains, but it is no longer softened by her kindness. It shows him plainly the entitlement, the laziness in love, the fear of emotional intimacy disguised as detachment. And now there is no one to distract him from the truth. The woman who once absorbed his unspoken pain is gone, and so he must face it alone. For her, this same absence is a quiet sanctuary. She no longer lives in the emotional noise of constant giving. There is a peace in her mornings now, an unhurried rhythm to her days. She finds herself smiling at small things she once overlooked, because she no longer lives with the low-grade ache of being undervalued. The air feels cleaner when you are no longer breathing for two. She does not romanticize the past, she sees it clearly. The moments of joy were real, but so was the slow erosion of her spirit. This clarity is her protection. It keeps her from reopening doors that lead to rooms where she cannot breathe. She understands now that love without reciprocity is not love at all, but servitude dressed in softer clothes, and she has no intention of wearing those clothes again. For the man, the days grow quieter, but not in a comforting way. He may try to reach out, to test the ground, to see if her heart still has a space for him. He sends words she once longed to hear, promises he once dismissed as unnecessary. But she does not answer from the same place she once did. Time has rewired her. Her heart no longer leaps at the sound of his voice. It listens instead to the calm in its own beat. It is in this moment that he understands the cost of underestimating her. For so long he believed she would always be there, that the comfort of her loyalty was a permanent fixture. But permanence is an illusion in love. What remains is not the one who stays no matter what, but the one who is met with equal devotion. The Stoics remind us that external things are not ours to keep, not beauty, not wealth, not even the affection of another. To believe otherwise is to live in constant fear of loss. She has stepped into the freedom of knowing this deeply. She loves differently now, not from need, but from choice. And choice is a far more powerful foundation than dependence. For him, the absence becomes a teacher that offers no comfort, only truth. It teaches that a woman's warmth is not a given. It is earned daily through presence, gratitude, and mutual care. It teaches that silence can be more final than words, and it teaches that once a woman sees her own worth without you, you no longer have the power to define it for her. For her, the absence is not something she mourns, but something she blesses. It has stripped away the illusions, revealed the places where she abandoned herself and returned her to the throne of her own life. She understands now that the highest form of love is not found in chasing someone who withholds, but in walking away from what does not grow. And so their story reaches its quiet truth. For him, she becomes the one who got away, the living proof of what happens when you fail to see the rare and the sacred while it stands before you. For her, he becomes a chapter she closed not out of anger, but out of alignment. She is no longer the woman who would stay unseen in order to be kept. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.